So we're now up to Daf Peites Amid Beis, and we're trying to study the Shita Rabbi Nassan, that in the case of Torei Menatame Alatar, the Mezid Lo Asav Lo Klum means that there's no afrosha whatsoever. I'm sorry, that there's no afrosha to be motzi the tar midei tevel, but we do recognize the truma on the tummy. So the Gemara asks on the top here, the Omaish no mehodisnan. What about a Mishnah Masechet D'mai? You have notzitz, and he was Torei min hanakuv. Nakuv, we said, is perforated. It's chayav in Trumas Umaisos min haTorah because it's Gedulei Karka, and he was mafresh from that on Gedulei Otzitz she'eno nakuv, which is not chayav. So he's being mafresh min achiyuv al haftur. And the Mishnah says, trumaso truma, the chal l'shem truma is chal on that which is torem from the otzitz nakuv, and that he has to give to the Kohen. And since he was torem from otzitz nakuv, chayav and trumas amaisis min haTorah, onto otzitz she'eino nakuv, which on a total level is part of in trumas amaisis. Therefore, that truma is truma. So on a D'Rabbanan level, you could say it's truma, but on a Doraisa level, it's completely teva. Because you cannot be mafresh min achiyuv al haftur. That's not a valid afrosha. And therefore, although we're going to require that the mafresh transfer over the truma that he was mafresh, which is not truma at all, over to the Kohen, nevertheless, lo te'ochel, the Kohen is not allowed to eat that truma because, again, it's really tevel, it's not truma, and a Kohen is also enjoined from eating tevel. Until the Yisrael will be mafresh a second hafrasha mimakom acher from something that's an otzitz nakuv, and then it'll be matir achilas hakohen on that which he was mafresh from an otzitz nakuv onto an otzitz she'eno nakuv. So in any event, we see clearly the din here is that when he was torem shalok din, and therefore it's tevel gamur, nevertheless, we're going to say truma so truma, and he has to replace it. So that's a situation in which Rabbi Nassan becomes very difficult now, because Rabbi Nassan says that when there's a chal l'shem truma on that which is he was torem, then it's not tevel. In other words, if Rabbi Nassan would say that that which he was mafresh is tevel, how could Rabbi Nassan say that he gives it to the Kohen? We should be choshesh that the Kohen will believe that he has here truma, and it's truma tmeya, and really it's tevel tameh. So apparently, Rav Nassan actually recognized the validity of that afrosha, and the tameh becomes truma. But here in the case where he was mafresh min achiv al haftur from a nakuv to an eino nakuv, we're not going to allow the Kohen to eat the truma and treat it as truma, but rather we're going to wait until they're mafresh mimakom acher. So Gemara answers, Shaidi Hoch, we have to go back to the Doraisa. The Doraisa, in the case of Tamei alatar, trumaso truma me al yisahi. There is a chal l'shem truma on a Doraisa level. And therefore, if it's truma tmeya, the mitzvah is sreifah. If the Kohen goes in and he burns it, that's fine. He's being mekayim the din Doraisa. But in the case of otzis nakuv, on otzis she'eino nakuv, that's not a hafrosh at all. And what you're left with on a Doraisa level is tevel. And therefore, we're not going to allow the Kohen to eat tevel. Kid Rabbi Loi, Yom Rabbi Loi, so what is the status of Tameh in the prohibition of hafrasha, it's like raw. It's like an inferior quality. Why? Because the Kohen can't do much with the truma. All he can do with it is burn it. He cannot eat it. And that's like being Torah min hara liyafa. And Rabbi Eloi is going to derive from a pasuk that truma is truma. The chsiv in the parsha of hafrashas truma. In Bamidbar Perek Yud Ches in Parshas Shlach, the Torah says, "Lo tisu olav chet barimchem es chelbo mimenu," meaning if you weren't mafresh chelbo is the best quality, then you're guilty of a chet. So avoid a chet by giving chelbo, giving you the best quality to the kohen's truma. So the question is, the im ein nesius chet, im ein kadosh, is nesius chet lama? If the afrosh is not chal, even b'di'eved, so where's the chet? I mean, he's back to square one. He's going to have to be mafresh a second time. So why does the Torah say that you'll be over a chet because you were mafresh something that's min hara and it's not chelbo? Obviously, the afrosh is chal. B'di'eved, the Torah recognizes that afrosh as a afrosha. And now you're guilty of a chet because you were mafresh something that's raw and you gave inferior quality to the Kohen and you're being mafresh to the Kohen. Mikan, from this we derive Torah min hara liyafa truma truma. And we're going to apply the same principle that b'di'eved yafrosha min hara ala tova ala yafa is truma to Tameh al Hator. Now here, Tosfos asks a gewaldige kasha. And the reason I'm so excited about this kasha is I actually thought of this question on my own. I don't usually come up with Tosfos kasha. And he asks the following. In the Masechet Tmura Daf Hey, we have one of the most world-famous machlokas in between Abai and Rav. And that is, Kol man de'ovid rachmana lo tavidi, ovid mahani yovid lo mahani. Abai is of the opinion that he ovid mahani, that if you violated the Torah law, like let's say you sold the field during Shemitah or something like that, then b'di'eved there is a chalos mechira. In other words, whatever you did illegally is chal. It's legally binding. Rava says that if the Torah says lo sa'avid, Torah says not to do it. The Torah is telling you not only do you violate an Isur by doing it, but also it's not chal, lo ta'avid. It's not valid. The chalos is completely gone. So therefore, you see that Rava has both A and B at the same time. He doesn't see it as mutually exclusive. A, the Torah prohibits it, but B, at the same time, it's not chal. It's not valid. And here the Gemara says, if it's not valid, then where's the chet? Beautiful kash. Amalei Rabba Rav Chizli Dochti Amr Lo Savlo Klum Kol Ikar Dafilu Ahu Giora Griva Hadalitivla. Unbelievable. According to you, Rav Chizda, that even the truma that he was mafresh from the Tameh is not chal. When the Torah does recognize that hafrasha, it's no different than Ra al Hayofe. Is my time of Mishum Gzera Duma Pasha V'lo Mafresh, because you're afraid that if you don't, if you allow the hafrasha to be chal and leave it in its status dorai, so then you might not be mafresh a second time. So that's a nice gzera. But mika midi timidaraisa vitrum mishum dilma pachaf kura amar lechulet v'chi bezdin masnin lakor minatorah dover minatorah. There's an unbelievably revolutionary position here that's inherent, or shall we say, that's latent in your psak halacha, Rav Chizda. You're taking truma doraisa in the case of Tomei Alatar, and you're completely uprooting and undermining its status as truma, which means that now we treat it as chulin. How could that be? Unless you're going to tell me that Bezdin has the power to be Oker Dover Min HaTorah. Now, I would add the following comment here. I looked around, I didn't find anyone who says this. The Gemara actually says that Yesh Koch Biad Chacham Lakar Dov Min HaTorah B'Kuvaseh. I'm sorry, B'Shevi Altaseh. And we have that in what's called the famous Gzera D'Rabba in many, many different places in Shas. We don't take a lulav on Rosh Hashanah of Shabbos. We don't blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. I'm sorry, you don't take a lulav on Sukkot of Shabbos. We don't take a shofar on Rosh Hashanah of Shabbos. And that's an Akiras Dovrim in Torah. Nobody questioned that. I mean, Gzera D'Rabba is all over the place. But the answer is that's called Shevi Altaseh. But here it's Kumvaseh, because now you're going to eat it as chulin, or you're going to burn it as chulin, and it's truma. So if Chizda says to Rava, you don't agree that Yesh Koch V'Yad Chachavim Lakar Dov Min HaTorah, we're going to do it the following Mishnah. And that's our Mishnah. We finally swing around to our Mishnah. The Mishnah says that she got news with testimony that her husband died. She went ahead and married a second guy. Now her first husband shows up and he's walking on 2 feet. And the Mishnah says, Havlad mamzer mizeh mizeh. Okay, Bishlam Meshenu mamzer from the second husband, he's a mamzer. That's a Dorais Allah. Ella Harishon Amai. Why, if she resumes her relationship with her first husband, to whom she's married, he never gave her a get, and she has a child, the child is a mamzer? Yisrael Malyu, on a Doraisa level, he's not a mamzer. And now the Rabbanan are going to give through the Gzera a status of a mamzer, called Sharina Leva Mamzeres. Now he's going to allow to marry a mamzeres, which is a violation of an Isa Torah. So the Chacham are being okered in Torah. And it's Kum Vaseh. Amalei. So Rabbi says to Rav Chizda, you misunderstood the Mishnah. Achiyam Shmuel, Aser b'mamzeres. V'chein ki Aser Ravid Omer Rav Yochanan Aser mamzeres. I feel bad for this mamzer. Not only is he enjoined from marrying any Jewish girl, a Bas Yisrael Sheiraj, he's not even allowed to marry a mamzeres, because on a Deraisa level, he's not a mamzer. He's got the worst of both. In fact, in my humble opinion, the only person he could marry is a Giores, because if he's not a mamzer, and in Torah he's not a mamzer, he's allowed to marry a Giores. And even if he's a mamzer, as the Rabbanan insisted that he's a mamzer, then he can marry a Giores. A mamzer is allowed to marry a Giores. I don't know. That's all I came up with. And I don't think they're going to allow him to marry a Shivcha Knayis, because Min Torah is Yisrael kosher. But my Karle mamzer liosur b'bas Yisrael. So we have now a fundamental machlokus between Rabba and Rav Chizda, and it's not just Rabba, it's Rabba and Shmuel, and it's Rabba and Ravin, and it's Rabba and Rav Yoch. They all say that when the Mishnah says that the child from the first husband is a mamzer, it only means that he's not allowed to marry a Bas Yisrael. But Chas v'Shalom, he's not allowed to marry a mamzeres. Whereas Rav Chizda understood the Mishnah should be read straightforward. He's allowed to marry a mamzeres. He's a full-fledged mamzer, and the Rabbanan have the power to be oker Dovim Min Torah. Shalach le Rav Chizda le Rabba b'yad Rav Acha bar Rav Huna. V'chi ein bezdin masnin lakar Dovim Min Torah. Again, Rav Chizda goes back to Rabba to try to prove from a brisa that the Chacham have the koach to be oker Dovim Min Torah. Now, by way of introduction, let's keep in mind that there's another principle that has to be understood, which is not in any way contradictory to Rabba's opinion that ain koach b'yad chacham lakim min Torah, and that is hefker bezdin hefker. So, in monetary realm, in that domain, the Chachamim have carte blanche, straight across the board. They can take money out of your pocket and put it into his pocket. The Brisa says, "Me'vasai adam yoreshes each tok tana." So we're talking about a case where a young girl lost her father, and her mother or her brother marries her off with Kedusha D'Rabbanan, and now she dies, Nebuch, and at some point in time, the Yerusha has to be transferred to somebody, either to the Yorshei Av or to the Yorshei Baal. Is Beit Shammai Omer Misha Talmud become Masa? Only if she reached the age of what's called Tagila Pirka. In other words, She has Gadlus Bishonim, she's already 12 years old, and Havas Seir, and she has Shtei Saros. Then and only then her husband inherits her. Even if she's not yet a Bogeres and a Gdola, she's still a Ketana, but nevertheless, if he took her into the chuppah, then the Rabbanan recognize that marriage, and now they're going to bump off all of her Yarshim, her natural relatives, for the sake of the Baal. Pack out, let the Baal take over her estate, and that's against the Torah law, because there's no marriage here to the Baal on a Torah level. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mishat Tiboil. We need more than just chuppah, we need be'ilah, as opposed to nichlasal chuppah v'lo nivel, and then v'yorsh. Not only that, says Rabbi Eliezer, if he's a Kohen and he's married to this Ketana, mitamela, with her death, he has to defile himself, contaminate himself with tumas mess, and bury him. And vocheles begino truma, and she has the same status as an Ashes Kohen. She's Kinyan Kaspo, and even though she's a Bas Yisrael and not a Bas Kohenes, she can eat truma once we get to that stage of Misha Deboil. So Gemara now analyzes. Beit Shammai Omer Misha Tamod B'Kol Masa. In fact, the Gemara Afagav Delo Nichnasol Lechuppah. She's still in Arusa. Okay, she's a Gedola, but she's only in Arusa. So on a Doraisa level, there's no halacha that the Baal is Yoresh is Ishto if it's only an Arusa. And furthermore, if he's a Kohen, how can he be Metameha to her for a burial if it's only an Eris? So let's rewrite the text of Beit Shammai. Now, that sounds awfully similar to Beis Hillel. So you need A plus B, you need Gadlus, B'Shonim, V'Simonim plus Chuppah. V'Hachi Kamer Beit Shammai LeBeis Hillel, what Beit Shammai saying to Beis Hillel, Tikam Risu, that which you said, Bishit Konis LeChuppah, and that is enough to give the Baal rights to Yarshin, his wife. No, that's not right. The chuppah is only meaningful when she's a Gedola. And Beis Hillel seems to assume that that's not so, that the Rabbanan recognize the marriage not only on the level of Erison, but even upgrading it to the level of Nesuin, and the chuppah of a Ketana is a valid chuppah. Probably what the Chachamim have in mind here is that you don't need das for chuppah. So therefore, even though a Ketana is a la bar das, nevertheless, the Rabbanan can recognize that chuppah. Rabbi Lezo Mishit Tigboil. When does the Baal have rights to Yarshin, his wife, who's a Ketana? That's only after Be'ilah. So the Gemara says, I don't get it. Omar Rabbi Lezer ein Masechet Ana klum, meaning that the Nesuin of a Ketana is not valid. So what good is Nivala, Bekatnusa, to make her into and upgrade our status to that of an Asua, so that the Baal could Yarshin her as an Asua? How is that possible when Rabbi Lezer doesn't recognize her chuppah? It means after she grows to maturity and she reaches Bagrus, and then there's Be'ilah, then the Baal is Yorish. So Rabbi Eliezer adds one extra link, meaning, according to Beis Hillel, even if she's a Ketana, we're going to recognize her chuppah, and after the chuppah, Baal Yorish. According to Beit Shammai, it's not enough that there was a chuppah, we need Gadlus. According to Rabbi Eliezer, we have to go one step further, we require Be'ilah. But all of them agree that the Baal is going to Yarshin his wife with Kedushay D'Rabbanan. Tani Mias, it says in the Brisa, Yarsha, that the Baal is Yoresh the Ketana. Let's say after she's an Asua, but she's still a Ketana. at least according to, Basil and probably Rabbi Eliezer as well. According to Torah law, there's no recognition of this marriage. She's a ketana, and therefore the Krovei Av will inherit her. And now the Rabbanan making a takana that the Baal will yarshin her, and in so doing, they are undermining the Torah rights of the father and the Krovei Av to yarshin her. So you see that Yeshkoch b'yatchamim lakadov in Torah. But the answer is here we're dealing with Bnei Momenos. And the Gemara answers Hefker Bezdin Hefker. When it comes to Bnei Momenos, the Rabbanan have, as we said before, absolute dominion. The Omer Rabbi Yitzchak b'nai Hefker Bezdin Hefker Shenemar Ezra. Ezra turns to Klal Yisrael at the beginning of Sefer Ezra. He says, he wanted to gather them together for a communal meeting because, like on kibbutz, they have these communal meetings, and he wanted to dash into them that they have to separate from their wives. They're married chicks and all this stuff, and he scared them. There'd be people who wouldn't want to show up to the meeting. You always have a meeting, and who wants to go to the meeting, right? It's almost like jury duty. So I promise you, I warn you that if you don't show up at this meeting, I'm going to take away all your possessions. You'll be separated from the kahal. So you see that yesh koch biad skenim and sorin lafkia rechusho shel adam of lozo. Right, and that proves that Hefker Bezdin Hefker B'Lazar Mihachi has a different source, not from Sefer Ezra, but from the Chumash itself. No, just 1 second. No, this is not the Chumash. I'm sorry, this is Sefer Yoshua. We didn't get up to Chumash yet. Ela hanecholos asher nichalu Elazar Akoin v'Yoshua ben Nun v'Rashi Avos Lamatos b'nei Yisrael. There's a strange pasuk here. It says Rashi Avos Lamatos. It could have just said Rashi Amatos. What's Rashi Ha'avos Lamatos? So the word Ha'avos is redundant. Ma Avos. It comes to be makish to the Av. Manchilim b'neim kol mashe yirtzu afrashim Rashim manchilim es ha'am kol mashe yirtzu. Bezdin, as the Rashi Ha'am, can determine who will possess what. Similar to the case of a father who's giving up his possessions before he dies. Now, there's a long discussion here about whether there's an afkamina between these two drushos. So we'll see if we have time for that. In any event, the Mishnah says, Umetamela, the Baal who's a Kohen, is metame to his wife who's a Kana. After she dies to bury her, that certainly proves, says Rav Chizda, that Yesh Koch V'Yad Chacham Lakadov in Torah. This is not Dini Momenos. This is Tumas Kohen, which is a Lav Doraisa, V'Halchim Doraisa Via Metamela. Only the father of this girl is allowed to be Metamela, even if he's a Kohen. And we're going to push aside the father. And we're going to say the Baal, who's a Kohen, is going to bury her, and we're going to violate an Isa Tumas Kohen Doraisa, Lav Doraisa, and it's all based on the Takonis Chacham of Kiddushay Ketana. The Gemara answers Mishum Dahavile Mes Mitzvah. In this case, we cannot activate the principle of Hefker Bezdin Hefker to be matir the Yerusha transfer of the Yerusha, but we can rely on a different halacha, which is also granting the Chachamim the ability to be Oker Dov in Torah, and that's the halacha of Mes Mitzvah. A Kohen is allowed to be Mitami Nei. He's obligated to be Mitami to a Mes Mitzvah. And why is this woman a Mes Mitzvah? Miyavi Mes Mitzvah. Mes Mitzvah means that no one's going to bury her. But Tanya Ezu Mes Mitzvah Kolcha Ein Lo Kovrim. No one's going to bury you. You scream, please help me bury her, and nobody responds. If there's no one to be osek in a burial, that's called a Mes Mitzvah, and even a Kohen is mitami to a Mes Mitzvah. We had once a sugya psachim about a Kohen Gadol who's a Nazir, and he comes upon a Mes Mitzvah. Kore v'ein on acher mein onim also. Oh, but if Kore v'acher onim also, if he screams out with a foghorn and people come by and they help out with the burial, that's not called the best mitzvah. And the Kohen could drop it and leave it for the Israelim to bury. But in any event, in the case of an Isha Ketana, well, what are you telling me? That she's laying there and no one's going to bury her? I mean, what mutal b'bizayon here? Well, why is that korim veinonim? I mean, where's this situation? How is this a situation of mes mitzvah? And the Gemara answers, Hachinami kevon dilo yarsi lo karyav lo onu lo. Now again, I can translate this Gemara literally, but I think we should go a little bit beyond the literal translation. Literally, the father is not going to inherit this girl, so therefore, he's not going to bury her. So you call out, and the Krovim, who are normally the first in line to bury the dead, they're not going to respond. Very harsh. This Gemara, what do you mean? Karyal v'lo anila? I mean, her closest relatives, her siblings, her parents, I don't know who it is, her children, they're not going to come and bury her? They're going to leave her for the Baal? I don't know. So I wanted to offer a different take or perspective on this Gemara, if you don't mind. Again, it says no kfiyah, take it or leave it. And that is that the Chiv Kvura is what establishes mes mitzvah, or not mes mitzvah, meaning who's obligated in Kvura? Forget about Kari Lovein Onim. I mean, that's just a poel yotze, but fundamentally in its root, the issue is who's obligated in the Kvura. And here the Gemara has a chap, and this is the second major breakthrough, that the Chiv Kvura is a function of Dinei Momenos, which means that the Yerusha generates the Chiv Kvura. Why? Because Kvura is an expensive enterprise. To undertake Kvura means you got to pay for the burial plot, and you got to pay for the, what do you call it, the parlor, the burial parlor. And what about the Chevra Kadisha? They also have to make a living. They have to also support their families. You have to pay them for burying the dead. So burial is quite a hefty expense. And people today spend tens of thousands of dollars, if not much more than that, on burial. So he who inherits her now is going to take the money from her estate and use it for her burial. Therefore, they become obligated in the mitzvah of Kvura. The father is not obligated in Kvura because he doesn't inherit her in this case. Because once the Rabbanan applied the principle Hefker Bezdin Hefker, they removed the father from the Yerusha, and in so doing, ipso facto, they removed him from the Chiyuv Kvura. That makes her into a mes mitzvah. And here on the top of Daf Tzadi, the Gemara says, V'ocheles begino truma. How could it be that in the case of a marriage d'Rabbanan, and she's a Bas Yisrael, she is upgraded to the status of Eishes Kohen, she's allowed to eat truma, she's a zar on a Torah level. Again, we see, says Rav Chizda, the Yesh Koch B'Yad Chacham L'Akon Tov Torah, and the Gemara answers, B'truma d'Rabbanan. She cannot eat truma d'oraisa, but the Rabbanan who created truma, let's say truma in Yerakos, so truma b'tzmanazeh, they, they will allow her to eat truma d'Rabbanan because they recognize the marriage of a ketana sheisi'ua ima v'avia on a d'Rabbanan. So this is where we're going to stop for today with Tashma on the top line of Daf Tzadi Amanaf. Wishing you a great